Okay, so thank you for joining me for this information session. This is about the 2023-2024 Partnership Fund Program, which we're in the second intake period for right now. Just to give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're going to be covering today. If you have any questions, I'm just going to ask you to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen or pop them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. But if we run out of time and we don't get to your question, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. I'm going to give you guys my email. I'm going to give you my phone number. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. We can even do a one-on-one session if you want to chat about your project and eligibility. I'm here to help. So if we don't get to your question, please don't let that be the end. Contact me. So we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that the land we identify as RTO 9 is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat peoples. RTO 9 and the Indigenous Tourism Ontario honor and respect the land, the people, and the treaties. We are extremely thankful for the original tour guides of these lands and all that they have shared. All those that reside, work, and play on these lands are treaty people, and we must honor the treaties in a mutually beneficial and equitable manner. With 1 in 5 Indigenous people in Canada living in Ontario, we believe working together in a mutually beneficial manner will help all Ontarians prosper through the joint development of the tourism industry. Ontario is home to one of the largest Indigenous tourism industries in Canada. RTO 9 and ITO are pleased to be working side by side together under an MOU to help advance the Indigenous tourism industry in Ontario. As an ally to Indigenous people and a partner of Indigenous Tourism Ontario, RTO 9 will commit to improving the socioeconomic conditions of Indigenous people through tourism by creating the space for Indigenous people to tell their stories on their terms. So just a little quick introduction of myself. My name is Meg Davros. I'm the operations manager here at RTO 9, and I'm responsible for managing the Partnership Fund program. So during the application process and throughout the delivery of your project, if you're approved for funding, I'm going to be your main point of contact. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. You can use the contact information here. I'm happy to connect directly with you. Again, one-on-one Zoom meeting or a chat over the phone about your project before you apply. I just want to make sure you have all the information and tools you need before you decide to apply. So please do not hesitate to reach out. So we're going to start with a little bit of an overview. What is the Partnership Fund program? So the Partnership Fund program is an initiative designed to build on existing tourism products and aid in the creation of new ones to enhance the diversity of offerings throughout the region, ideally resulting in extended visitation within Southeastern Ontario. The estimated allocation from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, or MTCS, which is an abbreviation you'll see me be using, is approximately $219,000. And that's between the 2 intake periods. So here are some of the main objectives of both the ministry and RTO 9 through offering this program. So we'd like to enhance tourism across the province, especially overnight stays. Support the RTO as a leader in regional tourism, but also as a resource for operators in the region. So the Partnership Fund, it gives you an opportunity to work directly with us, but also discover other ways that we can work together. So maximize support for tourism at a regional level by encouraging strong partnerships, expanding the breadth and diversity of funding partners, and encourage RTOs to engage industry partners to broaden their financial base to extend reach. We'd also like to support a coordinated approach that aligns planning, product development, investment attraction, and workforce development in the region. Assure the transparency and accountability of funding through the transfer payment agreement, and increase the economic tourism value of the region. So in short, we want to make sure that by providing some funding to our partners, we're able to expand on the economic impact of tourism within the region. So partner eligibility, who can actually apply for funding through the Partnership Fund program? So all eligible partners must be involved in the tourism industry in some capacity. For example, if a bank was doing something related to banking activities, they wouldn't be eligible for funding. Eligible businesses include not-for-profit and for-profit tourism businesses who are either incorporated or have an active CRA business number. You're going to need to provide that documentation when you go to apply. Indigenous operators are eligible for this program. They must be 51% plus Indigenous owned and operated. At the time of your submission, as I mentioned, you need to provide a digital copy of either your incorporation certificate, your CRA business number, your certificate of Indian status registry number, or Métis registry number if you're an Indigenous operator. So organizations who are ineligible to apply for funding through this program include DMOs, DMPs, municipalities, museums, BIAs, chambers of commerce, or any other membership-based associations. The focus of this year's funding is to provide support to operators and people who are delivering tourism products as we continue to recover from the pandemic. I know that feels like it was not that long ago. It kind of feels in the past in some ways, but we're still here to help support follow through on the recovery from the pandemic. So some of the other eligibility requirements regarding this program includes a $2 million general commercial liability with the RTO9 listed as insured. Your insurance company should provide you with a certificate of insurance stating this at no charge. We only require the proof of the insurance after you're accepted into the program. So all applicants must also be located within the region serviced by the RTO9. There will be a map included in the guidelines if you're not sure about where the boundaries are. In general, we're about from Quinte West to Cornwall to the Quebec border there, and then up north covering some of Frontenac. New this year, we require some communication with your local DMO or DMP prior to applying for this program. Your DMO or DMP should provide you with a letter of confirmation or a letter of support to identify to the assessment team that will be looking over the applications that you've shared your application with them. This is crucial because your DMO or DMP is going to be someone who can support your event or product. It could be financially, or maybe it's just through marketing support, but it's really crucial that they know what's going on in their destinations so that they can amplify that message. We're also requiring a disclosure of any additional funding you may be receiving for this project. There's just a box on the application that has you just list where your other funding sources are coming from. So what are some of the projects that are being funded? So new events. So this is specifically for brand new events or festivals that are entering into their first year of operation. This can be a one-day event, or it can be one spanning multiple days or maybe weeks. The important part is that it's something new, unique, and has the potential for some longevity in the region. And it gets people excited about coming and visiting. So this is an enhancement fund to bring an extra element to an annual event that you've been running for the past 15 years. It's intended to encourage new event creation and offer an opportunity for new organizers to get some support. Some examples of expenses that can be in this category include facility or equipment rentals, performer fees, workshop facilitator fees, tent rentals, porta potty rentals, and more. If you're unsure of if your project or expenses would be considered eligible under this category, again, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to chat. We're also doing the development of Indigenous tourism products. So this category is intended to help support Indigenous tourism operators get established in Southeastern Ontario and encourage partnerships with Indigenous participation between both Indigenous and non-Indigenous operators. Indigenous operators must be 51% plus Indigenous owned and controlled to receive funding. Or if you're a non-Indigenous operator looking to contract an Indigenous supplier to provide an experience, your contract must be 51% plus Indigenous owned and controlled. For example, if you're looking to offer an Indigenous culinary experience at your bread and breakfast, you must contract an Indigenous chef to carry out the experience. Nothing about them without them. So expenses in this category include business planning or website development to get an Indigenous operator established, or the contracting of an Indigenous operator to deliver an experience. If you're unsure if your project or expense can be considered, again, contact me. So our last category is the development of guided experiences or trails. So projects in this category include creating a curated itinerary with partners for, say, a taste trail or an art trail. It also includes making a physical trail system more welcoming to visitors with directional signage or an audio tour. Or maybe you want to start offering a guided foraging experience at your farm. There's just a lot of creative ways to work with personal guided experience that help build partnerships with your local community and other tourism operators. Again, if you're unsure, please reach out with questions. Expenses that we're considering under this category include directional signage, app development, translation services, third-party training, mapping, and so much more. So please feel free to reach out. So some conditions of funding. What are the ministry guidelines for project funding? So we'll start with the ministry's definition of a partner, which in the context of this partnership fund model, a partnership is defined as the agreement of the RTO to work with one or more entities on a specific project in support of the RTO's business plan. So the RTO is a project lead and the partner contributions flow into the RTO. They do not flow through the partner. So this means that the RTO9 holds the funds for the project and pays the invoices from suppliers directly for the project. The RTO9 cannot send funds to the partners. So projects may receive up to 50% of funding for their eligible project. However, it's very important to note that this is not a grant program. It's a partnership program. So it requires a 50-50 funding split with the applicant. So for example, if you have a $10,000 project you want to do, your organization would contribute $5,000 and the RTO9 would contribute the other $5,000. It's also very important to note that the funding in this is inclusive of HST. So when you're budgeting out your project, there's going to be a budget section on the application. It's very important that you consider HST on the invoices so that you're encapsulating enough money to cover all of your expenses. So the ministry sets guidelines for the use of the funds. So I'm just going to run through some of the ineligible expenses through this funding. Ineligible expenses include grants or flow through to other organizations. For example, you can't send money from this program to another granting program. Charitable fundraising, so we can't pay for fundraising for this program. Advocacy, donations to political parties or groups, capital costs associated with permanent structures, with the exception of wayfinding signage. This one can be a little bit confusing. That includes the purchase of construction equipment, contracting someone to build a structure in your property. We can't fund anything like that. It also includes competition prizes, prize money, or funds being paid out to competition participants. Let's say you were hosting a marathon and you wanted to give everyone who came first, second, or third $50. We can't fund that. We also can't fund previously incurred expenses. So if they took place outside of the project period, we can't go backwards and fund that. The refundable portion of the HST or other refundable expenses, expenses that do not directly relate to the delivery of the partnership fund project, in-kind donations, funds for operational. So for example, the salaries or wages of your employees, insurance costs, things like that. We also can't cover alcohol, food, or swag items. So this one's extra important to note if you're planning on running an event. We can't cover any alcohol or food expenses. It's also really important to note that based on the ministry guidelines, the RTO9 cannot reimburse a partner directly. So this means you cannot run an expense through on your personal credit card and get reimbursed for the expense. We require an invoice from the supplier addressed to the RTO9, along with their information for an electronic funds transfer. And then the RTO9 will pay your supplier directly. We also require any partners who entered into a contract with the RTO9 to pay their 50% contribution within 30 days of signing the contract, or the RTO9 reserves the right to reallocate the funds to another project. Payment can be made electronically we do not accept cash or checks anymore. You can either pay your 50% contribution via EFT through your bank account, or you can send an e-transfer using bruddock@region9tourism.ca. However, if you're using this method, we just ask that you include your name and invoice number in the note section of your transfer. I find that the e-transfers tend to be the easiest way for small businesses to send the money. There is a fee associated with doing an EFT transfer, I believe, but the EFT or the e-transfers have no fee associated with them most of the time. So that's normally how I would recommend you go about doing it. So upon entering into a contract with the RTO9, all recipients are required to acknowledge the support received by the use of the Ontario Yours to Discover logo, which is supposed to be put on all consumer-related materials. So for example, if you're making a brochure that's going to be going out to the general public, you want the Ontario Yours to Discover logo. The Ontario Trillium logo on all industry-related materials. So anything that's going to be kind of on the industry side of things, let's say you're sending out a newsletter to your industry partners, the Ontario Trillium logo is the one that you'd use. The RTO9 reserves the right to approve all of the logo placements prior to public release or publication. It's super easy. You just send me an email with a copy of your artwork and I just give you the go ahead. Any public announcements and media releases require pre-approval from the RTO9. Again, super easy to just contact me, let me know what you're planning. And all assets for this will be provided to you on Basecamp, which is the CRM we use, after you've been approved for funding. So once you go through the application process, your application's been assessed. If you get approved for funding, we would provide all of this to you. So once you've been approved for funding, there are some really important steps that are to follow regarding documentation. So number one, we required a signed contract and supporting payment within 30 days of receipt of the contract. Now, sometimes there's a little bit of a delay in me getting the contract to you because I have to write up everyone's contracts, get approval for it. But once you receive that contract, within 30 days of receiving it, we require it back with a signature and the 50% of the project funding. So you must attend mandatory Basecamp training for your project. That's something that I will do with you. It's virtual one-on-one. We also request that you notify us within 30 days after your project closes if what remains in your project budget will or will not be used, because we need to reallocate those funds if you're not planning on using it. So all invoices and supporting documentation, this includes WSIB, either a proof that you have it or a clearance letter, your copy of insurance, etc. That all must be uploaded to your Basecamp folder and provided to us. We'll have a little checklist for you to go through everything. And the most important thing is we're just going to go over what is really crucial: the signed contract, your 50% contribution, your proof of WSIB or clearance letter, your certificate insurance of listing the RTO9 is additionally insured. We have to absolutely have all these things before we can pay any of the invoices for your project. So if you're approved for funding, it's really important to get those things done as soon as possible to avoid delays in payments to your suppliers and to ensure that your project can begin on time. So because the ministry is actually the ones funding the program, RTO9 is expected to meet their requirements for RFPs depending on the nature of the expense. So for any expense that's under $5,000, you must indicate that a search for the best value for dollar was completed, and anything over $5,000 requires an RFP process to take place, which we normally recommend at a minimum window of 10 to 14 days for qualified quotes to be submitted. And then you must provide at least 3 written quotes for the expense. The partner will permit the RTO9, if required, to audit or verify the information submitted at the discretion of the province. So it's just to make sure that the due process is being done and fairly. So project reports. So what is required after a project is underway? So applicants, once approved for funding, are required to submit written ministry reports. So there's a mid-year or final reports, where applicable, depending on when your project starts and finishes, that helps us reconcile the use of the funds and provides insight into the project. So these reports often include a description of the activities linked to the project that was outlined in the application, digital copies of marketing materials and links to social media, proof of acknowledgement of the RTO9 and ministry funding support, an explanation of any variance between the application and report. So let's say you were unable to complete some portion of your project because your supplier was understaffed and they weren't able to complete what they needed to complete. You just have to offer an explanation of that in your final report. And then if it's a midterm report, we just need some budget forecasting for your remaining expenses that may be taking place between December 1st, 2023 and February 15th, 2024. So what is expected of applications to the program? So these requirements are mandatory for all projects entering into an agreement with RTO9 for this program. So the partner agrees to compliance with the RTO9 procurement policy. So that's that RFP process. The partner agrees to incorporate the provided Ontario logos in the project where applicable and compliance with the acknowledgements of the funding. The proposal is consistent with the RTO9's business and operational plans, which anything falling into our project categories should be falling into the business and operational plan. Compliance with program accounting, submittal of invoices for payment, documentation, and reporting procedures, and a maximum of 1 application per intake period per business. So if you're applying to this intake period as your business, you're only allowed to submit 1 application. So when you're submitting your application, priority will be given to those that are submitted from a private sector business. We are looking to support our operators. As I mentioned, coming out of COVID, we're looking to support those people. So priority is given to people from a private sector business. Things that promote overnight visitation, which increases the length of their stay in the region. People who include 2 or more partners that are not necessarily, we have financially committed to the project in addition to us, but also if you have someone who's in kind providing something to you. Partnerships are really crucial for the partnership fund. So the more partners you have that are there to support the project to completion, or involving more partners to kind of expand on what you're offering, really crucial. So think about building some partnerships with other businesses or community members or organizations to really build out what your project is. And then anyone who has really clearly defined and measurable goals, very important. One other thing I will say about the application process, we have a fillable PDF for this. There is a note on the PDF on each text box about the character limit. It's really important to stay within the character limit because otherwise your words will be cut off. So it's really important to stick to the character count. Less is more. Keep things precise and clearly demonstrate what the project is without going over those character limits. So the process and what the next steps are. So the second intake period just opened last Monday, so July 3rd. It's intended for projects that are taking place between September 5th and February 15th, 2024. So the intake period for the second intake closes on July 21st at 4 p.m. So applications won't be accepted after this deadline. So if you're interested in applying, sooner is better. Please be sure to contact our applications email as soon as possible with your application. Easier to get it in early than risk submitting it late. Application and full guidelines are available on the RTO9 website. I strongly encourage you to read all of the guidelines and the important information documents prior to applying, just to make sure that if you're not eligible, you're not taking the time to apply and then finding out you're not eligible after taking all of the time to fill in the application. So applications must be submitted to applications@region9tourism.ca. Please don't submit your application to me personally. Please submit them through the applications email. And then again, as I mentioned, a maximum of 1 application per organization for this intake period. So now that you've attended the information session, we're going to answer some of your questions. If you haven't done so already, please read through the guidelines for the partnership funds on the website. This document is really crucial. It contains all the information you need to know about this program. Also really important, connect with your local DMO and DMP and notify them of your application. Obtain a letter of confirmation or support from them to include with your application. If you don't know who your DMO or DMP is, please contact me or have a look at the RTO9 website at our destination partners. We have contact information there. Depending on which destination in the region you fall under, it's going to be a different organization that you need to contact. So if you're unsure, please drop me a line, call me, send an email, and I'm happy to connect you with the proper person. And then finally, fill in the provided application form and submit to applications@region9tourism.ca, along with that DMO and DMP letter, a copy of your proof of incorporation or your CRA business number or certificate of Indian status registry number or Métis registry number. At this time, that's the only documentation you're required to submit. So make sure you have those things all attached to the email that's getting sent to applications@region9tourism.ca. So then after the application window closes on July 21st, and all of the applications have been submitted, we take those applications and they're provided to an assessment team to ensure that the MTCS guidelines are being met. And then once that assessment team has had some time to review all of the applications and score them, all of the applicants will get contacted via email regarding the status of their application. So whether they've been approved or denied within 25 days of submission of their application. Please don't contact us requesting an update during this time. I promise we'll let you know as soon as possible. Answering a bunch of emails about wondering what the status is slows our process down a little bit. And we want to make sure that we're letting people know as soon as we know what's happening. Sometimes there's a little bit of follow-up that's required with some of the applications, which is why we give it up to 25 days, but we try to make that a much shorter window. So just some important reminders before we finish up today. So all of the funding is normally subject to RTO9 receiving the transfer payment agreement with MTCS. We have already received it. It would have come in, it came in the spring. So this intake period is a little bit quicker in the turnaround because we've already received our TPA with the government. But it's important to note that sometimes there is a little bit of a delay at the very beginning of the project just to get everything sorted and getting everyone's payments in. So projects cannot start without the receipt of the signed contract, and very important, the submission of all the required documents. So WSIB, insurance, the signed disclosure agreement, and the receipt of your 50% contribution. These things are really important. We need it done as soon as possible to prevent delays in getting your project started and getting your suppliers paid. So all invoices must be made out to the RTO9 with EFT payment. So what's going to happen is you're going to get your supplier to write an invoice. The address is going to go to the RTO9. They're going to send it to you. You're going to look at it and say, yes, this is exactly what we agreed to. Price is the same. And then you're going to submit it to me through Basecamp, our CRM. With the EFT information, we provide a form that they just fill out for that invoice. And then I take that invoice and the EFT information and I get it submitted for payment on a bi-weekly schedule. So if you're approved for funding and there's ever a time that you need to have someone paid by a certain date, please contact me. I can tell you when the next pay period is, so we can make sure that we're getting that invoice in at the proper time to make sure there's no delay in getting payment to your supplier. So guidelines and the other information, which again, I highly encourage you read as soon as possible. If you haven't already, it's available on the RTO9 website. So please go in, check that out. It offers all of this information on eligibility, what is an eligible expense, which is not an eligible expense. It's really important to give it a look through. If you read it and you still have a lot of questions, I'm right here. So contact me. Here's my email. Here's my phone number. Reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about your specific project. So it's not just the generalized guidelines. Happy to have a one-on-one with you to talk about your project, what we can do, what we can't do, where you'd fall in terms of the project categories. I'm right here. So please feel free to reach out. And that's going to conclude the formal part of this session. Again, please feel free to reach out to me following this session if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. And without further ado, we'll move on to the Q&A period. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box.